optimizing your Minecraft server. That's why you're here, and that's what we're going to do. Now, first things first, I want to lay two things out. There are basically two types of servers we're going to be looking at, which is vanilla servers, forge servers, fabric servers. We're going to throw all of those into like one basket, if you will. And then we're going to be looking at PurPur servers. And what PurPur is a server software that is similar to Paper, Spigot. It allows for plugins. It's actually a fork of those. And it allows for tons of optimization and lag reduction and all that. And if you're running a vanilla server, never plan on adding mods, it's super easy to switch to PurPur, and honestly, you should, right? Anyone who doesn't ever plan on adding mods should be running PurPur if they want the best performance. And as you can see here, a lot of these updates are Paper, right, updating, and it updates PurPur because PurPur is forked from the Paper server software. If this is all gibberish to you and you have no idea what I'm saying, I understand. But just know that if you want the most lag-free experience possible and you're running a server that's never going to have mods, never going to have anything like that, get PurPur. This is what you want, and there are guides in the description on setting it up and all that, but generally just know this is what you want. You want the PurPur server software. It's the same as any other Minecraft server software out there that allows plugins, except it's super optimized and set up to where you can customize it to make it as lag-free as possible. Also, in the description, there's a link to this, which is a link to all the optimizations we're going to be doing here. This is where I've gotten all this from, full transparency. I'm just going to be laying it out in a way that I think makes a bit more sense, but if you want more information on everything we're talking about, this is where you can go in the description down below. Now, as far as the two types of servers, let's go ahead and start off with vanilla Minecraft servers and what we can do with those. And truthfully, this will also work for PurPur servers. So any Minecraft server can have these optimizations, and those optimizations are going to be based within two things. One, the server.properties file, because every Minecraft server gets one of those, and two, some other things that you can do to customize the server and make it a bit more performant. So first things first, let's go ahead and look at this server.properties file. Like I said, every Minecraft server has one of these, and you can just edit it in Notepad if you want. And once you're in here, we're looking for two things. We're looking for the simulation distance and the view distance. So if we scroll down, we have the simulation distance here, and I would recommend setting this to 4. And then you have the view distance, which we have to locate in this as well, and I would recommend setting that to 7. Now, obviously, view distance is something that a lot of people want to have a lot of on their server, so you can turn this up if you want. I believe the max for a Java server is 32, but that's going to really strain your server and lag it a lot. So we want to go ahead and file, save that. Now, the other things that you can do for a server is pre-generating your world. So pre-generating your world means you're going to have mods, or you're going to have plugins on the server, and you can download a plugin that allows you to pre-gen. Specifically, you can download Chunky, and Chunky is a mod, it is a plugin, and as you can see, we got Fabric version here, we've got a Forge version here, we've got a Neo Forge version here, and then we've got a Bukkit, Spigot, Paper, PurPur version here. So no matter what kind of server you're running, you can download this. It doesn't work on vanilla servers, but again, as long as you never plan on adding mods, you should be running PurPur. And if you do plan on adding mods, go ahead and run Forge or Fabric and go ahead and do this. And you can use some commands to pre-generate your world. You can see all those commands here. For example, you can center it. You can set the radius. I would recommend starting with like 1500, 2000. And then once you do that, just run Chunky start. And basically, you'll be good to go. Now you will be able to pre-generate your world, and it will really improve performance. Now, there is actually one more thing that you want to look at when it comes to any Minecraft server, and that is going to be the server's hardware itself. You want to make sure you have a really good CPU, high quality RAM with really good RAM speed, as well as an SSD and things like that when running the server. Luckily, if you want to get all of this without having to worry about it on your own computer, without having to worry about port forwarding and all of that stuff, and even get some help with optimizing your server and making sure it's as lag-free as possible, well, that's where our company, SimpleGameHosting, comes in. Go to the first link in the description down below, the breakdown.xyz/SGH, to start your very own 24-hour DDoS-protected Minecraft server, where you can easily add mods, plugins, mod packs, and get a lag-free and amazing server experience, assuming that your server does have enough RAM for the mods and things that you're running. On top of that, if you do have any issues, if you're like, is my server crashing for RAM or is it something else? Well, that's where the expert live chat support team is there, and they can help you out, determining exactly what issues you may be having with your server and helping you fix those issues as well. So if you want a stress-free, super simple, and easy to use Minecraft server experience, go check out SimpleGameHosting at the first link in the description down below, the breakdown.xyz/SGH, and ensure that hardware isn't the problem with your server having lag. Lastly, RAM is super important for Minecraft servers. Most servers these days need at least 4 gigabytes of RAM dedicated to them, and you can add more, and sometimes you need a lot more depending on what you're running. It's not uncommon for all the Mods 9 servers to need 8, 10, or 16 gigabytes of RAM, especially if you don't pre-generate the world. Pre-generating the world really helps modded servers with RAM usage. So nevertheless, now that we've kind of done what you can do on modded, vanilla, and servers like that, let's go ahead and take a look at PurPur servers. And we have in the background here a PurPur server set up, and there's a bunch of different files that you'll be looking at here, and you'll have a server.properties, a bukkit.yml. From there, you'll have a spigot.yml. You'll have a paper configuration file, which is actually in the world folder here. It's this paper world.yml. And then we have pufferfish and PurPur. Yeah, we're going to be looking at all these. That's why this video is so long, and I do apologize about that, but the goal is for you to be able to follow along with this in each file individually and change it to the most optimized version of that file. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to change everything, because you might see me change something and be like, you know, I want a few more mobs than what I think this will allow, or I want that higher view distance, like what we changed in the server.properties file. You can upgrade that. These are all general rules. Feel free to change them. And if you're still lagging, feel free to change them again, right? It's kind of a trial and error process, and that's the unfortunate part a lot of times about fixing lag on Minecraft servers. But if you copy all of these settings, you're going to notice a performance increase on your server, especially if it's not a RAM issue or something like that, which, of course, adding more RAM would be the solution in that case. But let's go ahead and jump into it. We're going to start off here with the bukkit.yml file. Now, I'm going to be using this Fexy code editor called VS Code, but guess what? You can actually edit all these in a notepad if you want. It just can sometimes cause some weird, like sort of issues with the spacing and things. So I would recommend using VS Code. It's 100% free and linked in the description down below for you to download. In the bukkit.yml file, we're going to be looking at the spawn limits and the ticks per. Starting off with the spawn limits here, we're going to be going with basically these numbers. 20 for monsters. For animals, we're going to drop that down to 5. Water animals, we're going to drop that down to 2. Water ambient, we're going to drop that down to 2 as well. Water underground creatures, we're going to drop that to 3. Axolotls, we're going to drop that to 3, and then ambient, we're going to drop that to 1. Now, again, all of these are in a text format on this website here. As you can see, this is what we just went over, but it's laid out a little weird. For example, you talk about the spigot.yml here, but then if you go down to the next setting, there's also spigot.yml mentioned, right? What we're doing in this video is I've put it all into one where we're editing each file individually, so that's the benefit of following along with the video rather than using the README, but I'm also not going to be going as much detail as is done in the README. So it's kind of, a trade-off. Thank you so much to You Have Trouble for creating this, and, well, that's why it's linked in the description. This right here is a great way to truly understand what you're changing, but with this video, I just want to give you kind of the baseline and ability to edit each individual file. So like I said, we're next going to be moving on to the ticks per here, and then for that, for animal spawns, we're going to be going up to 400, which is actually default. For monster spawns, we're going to be going up to 10. Water spawns, we're going to be going to 400 on that to match the animal spawns. Water ambient is 400, and actually the rest of these are all 400 as well. So we can just go down through here and set axolotls and ambient spawns and everything to 400 ticks. It's going to overall create less, basically animals and monsters, all that in your world, but it's going to improve performance a ton because that's where a lot of performance loss happens. But we're actually now done with the bukkit.yml, so we can go ahead and do file save to save all these changes, and we can move on to the next file, which is going to be the spigot.yml. If you're wondering why I'm doing this in this order, we're doing it in the order that these were released. So bukkit came first, and then after that was spigot, and then paper, and then PurPur, and pufferfish was actually in between those two, and all of that. So nevertheless, from there, we can go ahead and move on to the spigot.yml, and we're going to be changing a lot more in here, and to make this easier, I'm going to go through and kind of move the files and settings around. I wouldn't recommend generally doing that, and you can always use Control F to find a specific setting. For example, the first one we're going to be changing and checking at least is view distance. Most likely this is going to be set to default here, and actually we can just go ahead and use searching for all of these if we want. Next up is the mob spawn range, which is right here, and we're going to be dropping that down to 3. Next, we're going to be looking at the entity activation ranges, which is right here. And for all of these, we're going to set them to 16 for animals. Monsters, we're going to drop those to 24. Raiders, we'll actually leave it 48. For Misc, we'll drop those to 8. Water gets dropped to 8. And Villagers gets dropped to 16. Flying monsters, well, we're going to increase those actually to 48. I don't like flying monsters, so I'm going to keep those a little lower. But nevertheless, that's where that can be changed. And then from there, we're going to be looking at the merge radius. How do we find that? Well, it's just easiest to search. And for the merge radius of items, we're going to increase that to 3.5, and then increase the XP to 4.0, right like so. Now we can move on to the next thing in this setting, which is the entity tracking range. So we want to type entity, if I can type correctly, and then tracking range. And here we have all the different entity tracking settings. Again, if you want to know what all these do, go read the README, because this video would be way longer than it is right now if we went through everything individually. So go check that out. But for the entity tracking range, we leave players at 48, animals at 48, monsters at 48, Misc at 32, and other at 64. So these actually seem to be kind of there by default and already set up, which is good to see. For the tick inactive villagers, we want to make sure that that is set to false, because villagers are tons and tons of lag can be produced from them, so we want to make sure that it's set to false. Nerf spawner mobs, by default it's set to false, but the reason this is here is if for whatever reason you have a lot of spawners on your server and they're causing some lag, you can actually set this to true, and any mobs that come from the spawner won't have any AI. Basically they won't move around, so it's great if you're doing like an auto kill farm or something like that, but with trial chambers coming out, I probably would leave that set to false. Hopper transfer is going to change your hopper settings, as well as hopper check and all of this stuff here. For the ticks per here on the hopper transfer, we're going to leave those at 8. And the hopper check, we're going to actually increase that to 8. You can also change the other hopper settings, like can hopper load chunks. By default, that's set to false. Turning that on will cause a lot of lag, but can actually create some cool stuff. So you have to kind of look through these settings and decide what you want for your specific server. However, that's that. The spigot.yml is done, so we can go ahead and save that. And we're going to be moving to the paper configuration file. Now, as I said, that's actually in the world folder here. Well, it is if you want to change it per world, because if we open this, it's empty. But you can move specific settings in here if you want to change something in just the world or just the end or just the nether. If we go into config, though, we have the global and world defaults config. So the paper global config, we're actually not, I don't think we're going to be changing much, if anything, in here. But this paper world defaults, we are, right? And so this is going to be what the default world configuration is for all of your different worlds and stuff. So we can go through here and edit all of these. It's going to be where we're making the most changes. So just keep that in mind. Moving on from here, and to get started, we want to delay chunk loads, and that's where we're going to be starting. By default, that is set to 10 seconds. We're going to leave it there, but you can change that if you need to, as well as the max autosave chunks per tick. We're going to be dropping this down to 8. Prevent movement into unloaded chunks. We want to make sure we change this next setting right here, prevent moving into unloaded chunks. We want to change that to true, because if you can move into unloaded chunks, it's going to really cause more lag, and hopefully all the chunks in your server are loaded because you've pre-generated your world, so that's super important as well. Next up, we want to be checking the entity per chunk save limits here. Now, by default, there are just these setups, but the file from No Trouble actually adds a lot more to this. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste these in here. Now, I have to change the formatting, because if you just paste these in here, they're going to break. So we got to make sure they're formatted correct and all that. And that's the spacing at the beginning is the most important part here. So you want to make sure that that spacing is set. And then once you've got that spacing set here, we can actually then go through and copy that to all of these. So I'm going to do that really fast, and then I'll show you what yours should look like when it's done. And again, if you want to find this, it is going to be in this file here. If we search for example, or I should say per chunk spawn limits, or save limits. I'm struggling here in this part of the video. My apologies. Per chunk save limits. If you search that, you'll have right here all of these starting values that you can just copy and then come over here and paste right in to your file. Right like so. And it actually even has them formatted correct with spacing there, so you're good to go. You can see by default we've got 8, 16, 3, all of these different things. So if you just want to pause the video and type these in manually, you can. Just make sure you get that spacing at the beginning correct, or you can just go to the README file in the description and copy them and paste them. Super simple and easy to do that if you decide to. Next up, we have the despawn ranges, and this is what's going to basically determine when mobs despawn. I'm going to go ahead and change all of these real fast, and then we'll run through the numbers. So this is actually pretty easy. You're just dropping all of these from the default values, which is 128 and 32, to 72 and 30. Every single one of them. The hard is going to be set to 72, and the soft is set to 30 on all of these settings here. Next up, we want to look at the per player mob spawns, and we want to make sure that per player mob spawns are set to true. That's going to reduce lag by keeping, strenuous mobs that aren't connected to players from spawning. After that, we have the max entity collisions. By default, that's set to 8. We're going to drop that to 2. It's very common. You'll see mobs colliding, causing some lag. We also have the update path finding on block updates, which is quite the mouthful here. Update path finding on block update. We want to make sure that we change that to false. And then from there, we have the fix climbing bypass. So fix climbing bypass, cramming rule right here, and change this to true. Sorry about this, and sorry about some of the tons of different settings. I'm just throwing them at you here. It's gonna be a lot of pausing in this video. I understand that, but it's one of those things. I prefer editing these per file like this rather than going through the list and jumping around between all the different files. And so I think this is generally an easier way than updating them manually from the have trouble list, but you may find the you have trouble list better. I know I mentioned a lot, but you should check that out. It's really good, and it really explains things way better than we can expect to do in this video that's already super long, to be honest with you. We're going to be looking at some different armor stands stuff next. So right here we have the armor stands. Do collision entity lookups? Nope, that's going to be set to false. And we also don't want armor stands to tick because, well, if they do, they will cause lag. So we want to go ahead and make sure that both of these are set to false. Speaking of tick rates, the next things that we should change are actually going to be stuff involving villager tick rates and stuff. So if we type in tick rates, we'll be able to see it here. But I'm actually not going to change this because we're using PurPur, and with PurPur, you don't need to change these. PurPur is going to handle that. So don't touch these. Actually, we're just going to leave these the same. But if you do want to change them, you can, and that is mentioned back here in the guide as well. We're going to be looking at the alt item despawn rates here, and by default, there's not much here. But of course, You Have Trouble has us covered here because we go ahead and search in this for the alt item despawn rates. They have a ton of useful stuff. Now, some of these might not be useful. For whatever reason, you might want to keep scaffolding for way longer than, 600 there, but we're going to go ahead and just copy these and paste them right in here, right like so. And yeah, by default, it looks like, I'm just making sure that our spacing is correct. I cannot underestimate how important that is. It might actually not be. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like we just needed to copy these. So we need to delete all of this. And when we do that, boom, there we go. Those are now going to work. What these are is actually when different stuff's going to despawn. So cobblestone, netherrack, sand are all going to despawn quicker than, scaffolding, for example. And honestly, these are just kind of junk blocks a lot of times that should despawn quicker because they can really bog down your server with like despawning. If there is an item that is like bogging down your server and causing issues, you could add it here. Next up, we do have the redstone implementation. We're going to be changing some stuff with redstone. By default, it's vanilla. We want to change this to alternate current, if I can spell correctly, alternate current. There we go. And from there, we have another redstone setting. And then from there, we want to go ahead and work on some more hopper stuff. We've already done some hopper stuff, but as you can see, there are specific ones to paper here. And then we want to take disable move event, set that to false, but then set ignore including blocks and set that to true. From there, we're going to be looking at the tick rates for mob spawners specifically. So I think it's going to be tick rates. And then we want to do mob spawner right down here. We want to set the mob spawner tick rate to 2. That's going to make spawners spawn less mobs, but that's actually a good thing, I promise. And then we have a few more settings here in tick rates we're going to go ahead and knock out. Grass spread, we're going to change that to 4. The container update, we're going to set that to 1 if I can find it. It's going to be left default there. And then the rest of these will also be left default. We want to optimize explosions, so we want to find that and set it to true, the optimize explosions setting. And then we want to find the treasure map stuff, and then we want to go ahead and change these to false. If you don't want these enabled, you can leave them enabled. It's okay to do that, and you can change some of the loot table settings here. If I can not set that to turtle and leave it as true. Loop tables instead of default. You want to go ahead and set these from enabled to false, but I actually like treasure maps, so I'm going to leave these to true, and this is just an example of when you can change these settings. You might want to use treasure maps, and that's perfectly okay, and that's why you can go ahead and leave these as they are in some cases and still not have a ton of lag. There might be some lag that is set up for that, and because this has been left on, but yeah, still, it's easy to do. And you can also set up, villager trading for these by changing that to true if you'd like, which is kind of cool. So different stuff that you can change. We've only got a few more settings here, and that is going to be the arrow despawns. So we want to go ahead and find that, the arrow despawn rate for creative. We can go ahead and set that as recommended to 20. And then there's also an arrow despawn rate for non-creative. So if we go to arrow despawn rate for right here, non-player arrow despawn rate, we want to change that to 20 as well. So that is kind of all the settings here. There's one more thing that the guide mentions, and that's going to be the anti-X-ray. This is actually going to cause more lag on your server if you turn this on, set this to true. But it's a lot more efficient and better than any anti-X-ray plugin or anything else out there. So if you don't want any X-ray on your server, you will set that to true. If you don't care, you're okay with people X-raying, you go ahead and set that to false and leave it as is. So I promise that was the hard part. The rest of this is actually going to be really easy. So make sure you save that paper file. That's all set up. And now we can go back to the main directory and find the pufferfish file. Now in here, we only have about 7-8 things we're going to change. We're going to be starting off with the max loads here. So max loads per projectile, not per tick, but per projectile here. Set this to 8. We want to go ahead and find dab, and then we want to enable it, right? So dab and enable it. This is actually what we, we're talking about earlier with the tick rates on villagers. If you have this enabled, you don't want to change that. So we want to make sure that this is set to true because we didn't change that earlier. Inside of these settings, we want to change the frequency to 20, which is where it is by default, as well as the activation for the mod. We want to go ahead and drop that to 7, actually. There's 4 more settings in here. We have the async mob spawning. So we're going to go ahead and grab that. So async mob spawning, that is set to true. It looks like even by default. as well as the suffocation optimization set to true by default. Love to see it. And then the inactive goal throttle selector will actually be changed from false to true. And one more setting here, which is the disable the profiler method, by default set to true. Love to see it. All right, pufferfish is done. Like I said, very, very easy there. Make sure that you don't accidentally open a new file and you save your pufferfish file. And then we want to go, last but not least, into the PurPur settings. And believe it or not, there's not a ton in here as well. Starting off, we're going to alternate keep alive right here. So alternate keep alive. We want to set this to true. And then we want to move on to the zombie aggressive towards villagers. Now, obviously, you might want zombies being aggressive towards villagers, right? And if you do, you can leave this to true. But we're going to go ahead and set this to false because it's specifically when lagging is occurring. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off because it's going to boost performance when the server is lagging. And then entities can use portals. This is one I just like to turn off because well, I just don't like entities using portals in general, so we can go ahead and turn that to false. If you're trying to move something to the nether, though, you might want to keep that on, so that's another thing there. And then the lobotomized villagers. If you have villagers causing lag, you can turn this on, right? Lobotomize the villagers. I wouldn't know, right? Like, I wouldn't. So this is under villager, lobotomize. You can say this, and they're going to have, like, no AI and stuff like that. I would recommend just leave this as false. Just, you want villagers to have as much function, so that's what that can change there. Last but not least, we want to check the dolphin settings here and disable them looking for treasure hunts. If I can find it, there it is. Disable treasure hunting search, change that to true. And one more setting, teleport if outside of border. We want to make sure that that is set to true. Boom. There you go. That's all the settings for your server if you have a PurPur server, which is what you should be running. It's a lot to set up. I understand that. And just to prove that, yes, the server will still start, I actually think, yeah, the server's been online. We're doing this, which is fine. You just have to restart the server for the settings to take effect. The server is going to start, so you don't have to worry about anything like that. If it doesn't start, you can just delete the files and try again, obviously, but there's no reason it shouldn't unless the spacing is out and kind of messed up there, right? If you have any spacing issues and things like that in those files, it can and will break stuff. That's why VS Code is so important, because you can count spaces and stuff like that easier in it than you can with like Notepad. But there you have it. That's how you can optimize your server. I would love to say that there's a ton of different ways to prove that this is better, but unless you stress test a server and you're currently lagging, there's not. But what you're looking for whenever you run a /TPS on a server like this is 20. And that's what we have right across the board here. Perfect TPS. 20 is perfect. Anything below 20 is lag. Anything below 16 is going to be really unplayable usually. So just keep that in mind. But there you have it. That is how you can customize your Minecraft server and make it lag-free and as optimized as possible. Thank you for sitting through this nearly 20-minute video. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Peace.